Let us aspire for complete enlightenment for the sake of liberating infinite, kind, mother sentient beings. And for that reason, we should cultivate the altruistic motivation or bodhicitta motivation. And with that kind of motivation, we should all participate in this teaching. I believe that all of us are seeking not just freedom from sickly existence, but also freedom from the two types of mental obscuration, so that we could become what we call complete enlightened beings or Buddhas. So that, I believe, is our goal and aspiration.
타바 되는 얘기요. 그래서 타바 되는 얘기 제발 다 가리고 그래서는 네 코알랑 인중 쇼히다 김마시나 아니 타바 되는 이거 게임만 많이 봐야란 짓이야 가버렸어.
So what is really included in aspiration is freedom from samsara or sickly existence, although that is not our ultimate spiritual goal, aspiration. But to be able to work for and attain liberation or nirvana or freedom from samsara, we must cultivate what is known as renunciation. We must renounce samsaric existence, and in other words, we need to develop aversion to the misery in samsara. Without that kind of aversion, or we call nyejo, renunciation, we cannot attain freedom from samsara. So in order to develop aversion to samsara and its misery, or renunciation of samsara, we have to reflect upon and realize what we call the disadvantages of being in samsara, the demerits or the faults of samsara. Generally, what we could see ourselves doing is that instead of seeing the faults of samsara, we somehow, how should I say, admire samsara and what pleasures that samsara affords us.
ngaranso nekab ke ta dewala chane and saji dewala chane ta ti tendi nye ne ani kowe shen de tongyo ma ta ti do sho ne ne saji dewa de chawa she ne ti tendi nye ma to kola shen ta da yungu ya ma ja teng ba do go go sta go.
So what I mean to say is this, that usually what we find ourselves doing is that we are attached to samsaric pleasures or happiness, and which is, by the way, very temporary and what we call contaminated pleasures and happiness, because these are not true happiness and lasting happiness. And out of such attachment, we pursue such pleasures and happiness of samsara, and thus, we do not see the faults or what is wrong with samsara. And so being in this kind of situation, we get trapped in samsara and we couldn't get out of samsara. Now, to be able to get out of samsara, step number one, so to speak, is to be able to realize what is wrong with samsara, or what is wrong being trapped in the samsara.
No, that day, kare is na kowe she tadi chani ane rang ane dunghe nyongsu del ta da rowa ringana so shesa tele shea de le da nyamong ke wang ke ta ya ba chini hinge de mhalang ko wang shigyo ma ngaran ta thama ba jo le ta nyamo ba ni cho she ni di wang ke ta kowe ne she yong go re shiri de kowe ne ke ta dunghe ta bo ji nyong ji ta cha te khen go re.
So how should we approach, understanding what is wrong with samsara or to be in samsara? Now we really need to fall back on our own personal experiences of being in samsara. What kind of problems and suffering, difficulties we encounter in our own lives, and also that we see in others' lives. And when we think about how we got into samsara in the first place, we really did not get into samsara by choice, but we were really thrown into samsara by our contaminated karmic actions and delusions. So the way we come into samsara was not a good news. We got our rebirths in samsara have been decided by or precipitated by delusions and contaminated karmic actions. So we did not come out of a choice. We did not say, okay, out of compassion, out of aspirational prayers, I decided to come into samsara to do some good. No, that was not our story. Our story was we were forced into, we were thrown into samsara by our delusions and karma. So that's the same story with all the 6 types of sentient beings we call migrators in samsaric existence.
So that kowe ne srizane rang de kowe ne de so du guyar to shitang longba nang jin sam tong jamares.
So as I explained this to you before, understanding samsara is to understand ourselves. How samsara is not environment or location out there. Somehow we got trapped in that physical environment called samsara. Samsara has to do with our contaminated physical and mental aggregates, and who we are and how we got into samsara. So this is what we really need to understand, that samsara is always with us wherever we go. It's not a place, it's not an address that we stay for a while.
Quale tabe compa todi chani rangi rangi dibisna minduta quade bangni tabato yermato shetani peta longban jin pan those tende atlik kesam tongjamares.
So that's because when we talk about how could people liberate themselves from samsara, any individual who frees himself or herself from delusions for good, so they could liberate themselves from samsara. So it's very personal. That's the point I want to make. It is not a location. It's not an environment or place. If that's the case, then we could all decide not to go there, so we could all be out of samsara by now. But that's not what it is. Samsara is very personal and very intimate to who we are, as person. And so individuals who make efforts to get rid of delusions from within their system of the mind, they are the ones who get liberated personally and individually. So therefore, because samsara is very personal, so we need to, reflect upon what are the personal, experiences that we go through, being in samsara. So as a part of understanding samsara, which is an essential part, is that we really need to understand the suffering nature of samsara. What kind of sufferings exist in samsara? So therefore, the teachers should be willing to teach about the samsaric problems and suffering, and the students should be willing to listen to this. If we all decide, not to really talk about suffering of samsara, that's not a good idea. Because we do need to talk about it, and we need to realize the suffering nature of samsara to get out of it. So long as we do not find nirvana or liberation, we as individuals or beings, keep on being reborn over and again, continuously in different states of samsara. So that will be our story, that we take a form in samsara, we die, then we are reborn again in samsara. So it could be in different parts of samsara. So that's why we talk about 6 states of existence where we could be in samsara. And the worst kind of a situation or a state of samsara that we could find ourselves in is called nyalwa, means hells. And hells consists of both what we call extreme hot hells and extreme cold hells, plus auxiliary hells or surrounding hells. So to be in those hells is to be in the worst situation in samsara. Beings in the hot hells, they are constantly tortured by unbearable intense heat, as if they are just cooked on the burning iron surface, and their bodies and the flames become almost like indistinguishable. That's the kind of intense suffering of heat that they go through. And there are 8 hot hells, and so the intensity of suffering in each of these hells is greater than the other. And there are also cold hells where there is intense suffering of, cold, and so where, one's bodies are frozen to death, and bodies are cracked. They open like the lotus flower petals, and that's the kind of suffering cold hell beings go through. So again, there are 8 cold hells being described, and the intensity of suffering in each cold hell is greater than the other cold hells.
Nyewe neta, ane zunsun guzon riba dati liyo, tsamalo ranga sengwe, migiwi semla tene, tende jinawa khadne, dungi ti nyongo yari mato, nguwa supagele, ngajo tab, daba nangi shene, zunkan ne, tili shene, ne zunsun ne, tende ka yuwa maras.
So in Buddhist literatures, we do talk about, the hell environments, cold and hot hells, for example, as well as the hell, agents or the guardians. And so they do horrible things to the hell beings. But these are all what we consider as more experience at a mental level. These are the creations of one's distorted minds and deluded perceptions. These are not as if there are real places called hells, and there are real hell guardians, as if like really people there are torturing you. But these are all the results of one's own distorted and deluded perceptions and negative karmas.
Tal migiwi ranga migiwi le sapi. Ati ani ta reflection nam du ta ti ani pe nawa ten di shani woni thonde pe ta dunge ngos nyomba tan nangi ta yungu arste.
So as a result of one's really tremendous negative karmas and delusions, and beings in the hot and cold hells, you see, as Geshe used the word, reflections of as if like your negative karmas and delusions reflected in your sort of psychological experiences, and then you really, it becomes very real to the beings who are experiencing these sufferings, although everything is, the descriptions of the environments and the beings within are not real as in a real people and being, but it's more in the sense of a psychological realism. But it really appears very real to the beings who experience such suffering.
Kali khab do hu zan de ngu ne pe mi chi zu sho shin mi chi zu pe ta ning go lamba zan de de yung gu ar bas.
And I think you might get a sense of what we're talking about, if you have experienced both good and bad dreams in your life. Just think about all the, kind of a fairy tale dreams you have. Everything is wonderful, and you are just like giggling and jumping and happy and excited and, all of that. And then think about the nightmares you had, where you feel like you are tortured to death or something, and you just find yourself crying, and actually next morning you see that your pillows are wet, So the things which you experience in the dreams, good and bad, appear very real to you. So this is the same thing we are talking about, the experience of hell beings. So when we talk about even though it has a very psychological level more so, that there are tremendous suffering being experienced by the hell beings, but we have certain experiences in the area, as I just mentioned, like the nightmare and so on, which seems very real, although not real in the sense of you can touch it. It's tangibly real, but it is psychologically, personally, and emotionally very real and traumatizing.
The Jazzy Chamber Kyola, Shinju Gunale, Jassing Sai Suishes, and it's a bad Zonke, so going on Margin and Rang Sing Migiwi, similar thing, the similar thing. Big Senation, but then towards St. John de American.
Great Indian Bodhisattva Mahasattva Shantideva, in his Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life called Chunju, Bodhisattva avatar, and he raises these questions, as we describe about how the beings in the hot house are fried and cooked and on the burning iron surface. So then he raises the question, who has created the burning iron surface, for these hell beings? He said, no one but their own karmas. And and this is what exactly he said, as Buddha said it, because of the negativities of the beings, they experience such sufferings very personally and psychologically and emotionally as a result of their karmas. It's not like somebody is manufacturing the burning iron surface, to cook these hell beings. These are all reflections and the outcomes of their negative karmas. So there are, hot and cold hells, 8 in each categories, and then there are surrounding hells. So let's, just move on to the hungry ghost world. And so the predators, the yidak in Tibetan, their suffering is due to due to starvation, because of hunger and thirst. So again, if one creates and accumulates the strongest negative karma, then that could precipitate one's rebirth in hells. If one's negativity is of what we call moderate intensity, so to speak, then that could precipitate one's rebirth in the hungry ghost world, where there is intense suffering of hunger and thirst.
So that many lost again at the million Bunchaman Pole pay Chutikwa Gyeltsen, say, come to Gyeltsen, but that's I am ever pay Topi don't say Gundo or Dawn it up doing young, then they go at the
So by our human, our calculations, hungry ghosts, they have to remain in their state for billions of human years without even finding a drop of water or a morsel of food.
Kahigani say that they come to the Pajang Roman Tommy and the Tin to this and the Sam have a change of the data and it gives what the number Shani, Sam have a twin of Calgaris.
For many predators, from long distance, they have this illusionary perception that there are, just yummies, out there, they could just go and enjoy. So, but as they go to the site where they thought the yummies are there, but what they really find is all destructive weapons and horrible things that could torture them. And many kinds of predators of the hungry ghosts, they even, because of their delusions and karmas, couldn't see anything that is eatable or drinkable. Even if they could be around, lying around them, just by the of their karma, they couldn't see any of those things.
Ma Samatobashiti, Kilepe, later one killer, Benduba and Nubation, and the Mahibashe, Mas Topshita, Ben Non Mandrovasheni, at the Riketa Dungi.
And many, they could see food and maybe they try to get a little bit of them, and as they put it in their mouth, nothing goes through their, tiny neck. Their necks are all like constricted by the due to the negative karma, and so nothing can be swallowed in, and so that's the kind of intense suffering they go through.
That
and then there are the sufferings of that animals go through. By animals we mean that's the kind of animals. And so animals are generally characterized by the state of mind where they really couldn't decide, generally speaking, what is good and what is bad. And so they don't have the knowledge, discriminative knowledge to, find out what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, and make decisions for themselves.
누신다 기부시 진이 기길 사야겠다 들린도 것을.
And then, of course, they are constantly under the fear of being, eaten up by the larger and the bigger and more powerful ones. And this, for example, we already know about. Look at the fish, the world of fish, how the big fish eat little fish, and so little fish have to always get scared, that they can be eaten by the big ones. So that's the kind of suffering in the animal world.
That 땡랑초 때 고조시야 다탄 미 땡이 용케 다 다가나 얘기때 마와다 잔쇼고 땡요레스.
The animals we see in the human world, and many of whom we love and we domesticate them as our pets, these are called scattered animals. They are really not in the animal world, but they are in the human world. The real animals are in the animal world, and most of them are underneath the oceans.
So that they and zubo chemo kibishene. And Zoe Chimikivision, Koya Gujunja Matabashi, that Chunju and Zokatania Chunju and Dick saying is Zubotin says Asatarashi, that the desert Nate has Zubola Geshe. And then say, you say, member, Takarasa, Tuda, number could do him Yoni, they got that and the rest.
And it's not just that the small animals can get eaten up by the big ones, but sometimes the big ones get eaten by the small ones. And there are cases where some animals are so huge and almost like immovable, and they couldn't do anything, but all these little ones are just poking and, eating you up from all the different parts of your body, and you couldn't do anything. Just sit there and get eaten by them.
So we didn't
need to understand all these different types of animal the beings and what kind of sufferings beings go through in samsara. So if we kind of we don't talk about the suffering of samsara and block out that whole information and knowledge. And we always talk about the good side of samsara, if relatively speaking. Then once we get hit by the suffering, then we go nuts with it because we don't know how to handle it. We never expect, don't know anything about that side of the story, and so we get badly hit by suffering, and we lose complete control over our situation.
사실은 가리나다 년가 좀 기비지는 년가 여버든 만에 뭐만 하고비나 코텔 강고시에 주는 거로 봤어. 다때잖이 선도 마땅 버시네 년가 된데 여버다 진짜 한 먹고 버시게 말라버시 샤비나 탑도가 돼 동행 용선 때 갈하고 기비차거든.
I think it is really, generally speaking, wise to talk about the risk and dangers of samsara, so that if there any possible way we can avoid those risks and danger and get out of those dangerous situations, then we can do with our knowledge and understanding. So talking about samsaric problem and suffering is not being very pessimistic and just kind of a doomed version of perspective on life. But as a matter of fact, conventionally speaking, if we have to journey through a very risky and dangerous situation, don't we want people to tell us, or those who know, what are the things we should expect so that we may be able to safely go through the dangerous zone? But if we don't have that knowledge, we don't want to talk about the risk and danger, then we have even bigger problem to go through that area. So just as it's wise to talk about the risk and danger of a journey involved so that we could avoid the risk, or we can counteract the risk and go through safely, in the same way it is very wise and many ways optimistic to talk about suffering of samsara so that we can know how to plan and get out of samsara.
그래 다 간데시고에서는 미겨 첨부지 세배는 야월시 능지 세배는 다 예달시 중의 미겨 중진 세배는 다 든들시고요.
So the point I want to make here is in accordance with intensity of our negative karma, that we could find ourselves in any of the three unfortunate states of rebirth called bad migrations. If our negativity is of the greatest intense, strong negativity, then we find ourselves in hell. If it is of a moderate intensity, we could find ourselves in the hungry ghost world, Yida, predators. And if the intensity of negativity is small, relatively, then we could still find in the lesser kind of animal worlds.
That in the Tangmalo, Lamrigan law, so say any mature that train to do not yet, and this social law, those in the Hosan Shagres.
So much of these things are described very extensively in, practice guidebooks such as Lamrim. Lamrim is a Tibetan term which means stages of the path and leading to enlightenment. So we can read the literatures called Lamrim and get ourselves acquainted with, these different types of suffering in samsara and how to tackle them and how to get out of the sufferings.
That Rory took Nanita, somebody, Nendo somebody, Dendo somebody, Meta, Lamayita, Flies, to somebody, Dendo was secretaries.
So we very briefly talked about, beings in the hells, in the hungry ghosts, and in the animal world. So they are categorized as those in the unfortunate states of rebirth in samsara. Now there are the three fortunate ones, relatively speaking, in samsara, and they are the humans, us humans, and the celestial beings or the divine beings called, the devas, and the demigods, or we call asuras.
That kind of is in the Gare, and then others that Millie, that naturally don't have your Rabas, then I have to us. Pena, she with Dungi, Gengo Chabi Dungi, and a Chevi Dungi, Navi Dungi, that Dungi, Lucinta, Chevita, Ye, Lucy, yours, that you, Mamma, as you to us.
So we have some sense and knowledge about what kind of problems and sufferings we as human beings go through. I mean, there are tons of sufferings we go through, but some of the major ones we all go through are related with birth, aging, sickness, and death.
That indeed doing it, that Luch doing it, Simch doing it, and then the ring over San and many be doing it, that in a moment to us.
Then we have, of course, the physical suffering and the mental suffering and the emotional suffering and not being able to find what we really want and, getting what we don't want and, being separate from the loved ones and, just running into the who we hate or dislike and all these problems and sufferings we go through in our life.
탑재그 동해 다 사망인 차도 기부지를 하다 차도신 사단 승리 누신 탑재그 동해 기여들이스.
So in the case of asuras of Sama in Tibet and demigods, they do suffer from pains and suffering, but their major suffering is to do with combating with divine beings or devas, because the demigods are very jealous. They're extremely jealous beings or people of the prosperity of the divine beings, and then are constantly fighting with them, and then most of the time they get defeated and constantly, going through that pain.
That hal any chip of doing it. Flag any pay. I think they like that. Kiwi cup and that by Sosu any my shares at the tongue goddess. And by Sani Masani, and Neo Malapa, meeting like Shavy, that could pay Duja Hibuji. Only to pay on Duja Hibuji Tongue, said sometimes chip, Hala chip of you. Chimbo Tongi don't hesitate.
Now, the divine beings, or the devas, they got their problems, until. And that really becomes obvious when they are nearing death. And until then, their life seems to be smooth sailing, but then they get hit by tremendous suffering because then they started to know what's going to happen after they die, where they are going to be reborn, what kind of sufferings they are going to go through because of their pre-knowledge, of the death. And that's a tremendous suffering that they go through.
So that indeed that do are return to us to conversation don't nature.
So my central premise and thesis today is that it doesn't matter in which of the 6 situations in samsara, or 6 types of beings called 6 migrators, we become, there is one or another kind of suffering, and we need to realize and understand that.
단단히 해야 가르에서 다른 걸수 봐봐 선도 동발 랭킹 저거 내가도 대시고 가르에서는 랑 코아당에서 동해는 지스타니 데리서 비니버도 컨트롤이 봐 이체버세네 아니 선도 동발 랭고 다른에 또 휴야도 메시 도시스.
So if you are wondering why I'm, talking about suffering of samsara here today is because I'm preparing my youth, especially those who decided to take the refuge vows later, that you need to understand the suffering nature of samsara, because then once you realize what is wrong with samsara, then you are able to develop trust in the abilities of the 3 jewels to help you get out of samsara.
단단히 해야 돼. 선도 동발 렘세발 동발 톱세발 주니가 나니 코아당에서 동해는 지타시야 돼. 주티를 뜻당이 휴빈스.
So talking about the sufferings and dangers and fears of samsara is that so that we develop, this healthy, positive sense of fear with regard to the suffering of samsara, so that we are afraid of the sufferings in samsara and we want to get out of it. So that's one of the 2 essential causes of taking refuge in the 3 jewels.
No. Dale, 주세.
다
신데 달에 아니 다다데 네 휴베데 아니 남진 저런 저거 대냐와당 예다다 딘도 동에 저 그래 상고해지 말아봤어.
I also feel that maybe generally, you really don't think about the sufferings of hell beings and hungry ghosts and animals and so forth, do you?
저런 저 땅방 이게 야지 이게 karting ting de marting ting de dai sang tong de ma to me ma sang tong marwas.
Maybe you are mostly caught up in a very abstract way of thinking, a lot of the time, maybe more about the cyberspace and what is up there in the outer space, some glittering, bodies or planets and so forth, but not so much about the realities of the samsara sufferings. But we really have to bring ourselves to the ground, so to speak, and understand the ground realities of samsara. Because if we want to get ourselves out of samsara, we need to understand, what is wrong with samsara. The whole point of talking about, samsaric suffering is because we want to be free from samsara, we want to be liberated, we want to find nirvana or nibbana. So in order to do that, we have to understand why we must get out of samsara. What is wrong with samsara? So as we talk and realize more about the suffering nature of samsara in different states of suffering, I think we started to really feel a sense of fear, and nobody really enjoys, I think, talking about the suffering and of samsara, and that is what we really need to do. We need to have this healthy sense of fear of the suffering in samsara so that we could use it to get out. It is stated that without renunciation or aversion to misery in samsara, there is no nirvana or liberation. So to develop aversion to misery, we have to see and realize the extent of suffering in samsara. So it is in that sense, it is, not only very important, but in a sense a must for us to realize the suffering nature of samsara. So understanding the suffering of samsara is like laying the foundation for our liberation.
티 간제레타 타베 공바 토야데 다가나기 샹도 domba mena number sanji bare gu amar shambi dommena.
So, and it's also related to taking refuge in the three jewels. Without going for refuge in the three jewels, one does not become what we call a Buddhist.
Shandu domba lengu junsi karesna dungi tanjule tayak chedo. Da ane lengu yores.
And the purpose of taking refuge in the three jewels is to be able to free ourselves from all kinds of suffering in samsara.
That and that any touch on Sunda. Any transfer that ring, Ninghas Jagurus, Shamdu Dom Mangit, Tang Hama, Yunkin, and the United Trans Pen and degrees. And Junkin does.
And so we will stop there this morning's teaching and give a little kind of a space for people who just came for the teaching. And so this is the time. If you are not ready to take the refuge vows, you don't have to participate in the next part of the teaching. So you could take off. And those who want to take the refuge vows or taking for the first time, or those who have taken the refuge vows before but want to restore their vows, so you should stay for the next part of the teaching and ceremony, ritual refuge ceremony. Now, before we do that, because you're going to switch off internet, let me make this announcement first. We got one prayer request today for Laura Huff. She's going through surgery, and there will be no meditation on Monday because Monday evening the Tibetan Association of Southern California is holding prayer vigil for the Tibetans who were gunned down in Tibet, because this Monday is considered as the 49th day of the Tibetans, 150 plus Tibetans we know got gunned down, killed in Tibet. So the Tibetan Association is doing a prayer vigil, as all Tibetans and friends are doing everywhere in the world on this particular day. So the prayer vigil is from 6 to 8 at TTL. So we have no meditation regular, but you are welcome to the prayers. And Wednesday, there will be no teaching because Wednesday is the regular Tsok offering, the feast offering commitment practice. So there will be no Wednesday teaching. And what do I have here? Monday, Wednesday. That's it, yeah.
That is so.
Okay, the people who just came for the teaching, you're welcome to take off. And others who are staying for the refuge vows, because if you commit yourself to become a Buddhist, you don't have to become Buddhist to practice certain part of Buddhism. But if you commit yourself, then refuge vow is essential for that. And so those who have already taken refuge vows before, and you could stay and, as I said, restore your vows. But the monks and nuns, you're welcome to stay, but you will not be participating in this refuge ceremony because you will not be taking the refuge vows here. Because you already received many higher level ordination vows, so you don't need to take these refuge vows. So you are welcome to stay. But you won't be taking the vows from me.
That they can get you can start doing it,